The silence in our house has a weight to it. It's not a peaceful silence, the kind you'd find in a library or a sleeping church. It's a heavy, thick thing, filled with unspoken words and old resentments. It presses down on me, settles in the hollows of my collarbones, and makes the simple act of breathing feel like a conscious effort. It's been 3 hours since Robert slammed the front door, the sound of it cracking through the afternoon quiet like a gunshot. The grandfather clock in the hall, his father's before it, seems to be ticking louder than usual, each tick a tiny hammer blow against the anvil of my nerves. I am sitting in the floral armchair, the one he calls my chair, though he was the one who picked it out 30 years ago at a furniture gallery he'd seen advertised in the paper. He said the muted roses and pale green leaves were suitably feminine. I'd wanted the plain blue one, a color like a deep, calm lake. But Robert has always been the one to decide what is suitable for our home, for our life, for me. My hands are resting in my lap, and I can see the tremor in my fingers. It's a faint, bird-like flutter, a betraying little dance that started a few years ago whenever he raised his voice. I press them together, palm against palm, trying to still them, to command my own body back into a state of composure. But it's no use. The shock is still shivering through me, a cold current beneath the surface of my skin. It all happens so fast, as it always does. One moment, the afternoon was unfolding with the predictable rhythm of 1,000 other afternoons. The scent of cut grass from Mr. Henderson's lawn next door, the drone of a small plane overhead, the faint, sweet smell of the lemon polish I'd used on the coffee table this morning. The next, the storm had broken. He had come into the living room holding his wallet, a look of thunder on his face that I've learned to recognize with the same instinct an animal recognizes the scent of a predator on the wind. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood there by the mahogany bookshelf, his presence filling the room, shrinking it. I was trying to read my book, but the words had started to blur the moment I sensed his mood. He opened his wallet and pulled out the card. Not his card. Not our joint account card. He held it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were something distasteful, something he'd found stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Sarah's card. My daughter-in-law's. I was at the hardware store, he began, his voice dangerously low and even. That's always the worst, when it's low and even. The shouting comes later. The quiet beginning is the pressure building behind the dam. I needed a new set of drill bits. The ones we have are worn to nubs. I decided to put it on this. He flicked the card. Figured it's all the same pot of money, isn't it? For the house. For us. But it wouldn't go through. The young man at the counter, barely old enough to shave, had to tell me it was declined. Declined. Me, Robert Johnson. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew, with a sinking certainty that felt like a stone dropping through my stomach, exactly what had happened. Sarah must have changed the password. She must have. And she hadn't told me. Or perhaps she had, in a text I hadn't seen, my phone being something I still find more of a nuisance than a convenience. I didn't say anything. What could I say? I just watched him, my heart thumping a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. Then I tried to use it online, he continued, his voice getting tighter, to order that new weather vane for the garage. I thought, well, maybe the chip is faulty. It happens. But it wasn't the chip, was it, Patricia? It asked for the password. The one you gave me. The one Sarah so generously gave you. Maple 7. Simple. Easy to remember. But it wasn't Maple 7 anymore. It had been changed. He took a step closer. I could smell the faint scent of his aftershave, the same sandalwood scent he's worn for 40 years, and beneath it, the acrid smell of his anger. So, I have to ask myself, why would she change it? And more importantly, why wouldn't she tell you? Unless she did tell you. And you just forgot to tell me. The accusation hung there in the heavy air between us. The unspoken part was worse, or you didn't forget. You deliberately kept it from me. You and her, you're plotting together. I didn't know, Robert, I whispered. My voice was thin, a thread of sound in the charged silence. She must have. I don't check my messages often. Maybe she sent a text. He let out a short, bark-like laugh that had no humor in it. A text. Right. Of course. Or maybe she changed it because she doesn't trust me. Maybe because of something you've said to her. Have you been complaining, Patricia? Crying on her shoulder about your poor, difficult life with your beast of a husband. His eyes, which I once thought were the kindest blue, the color of a summer sky, were now chips of ice. The cruelty in them was a physical blow. I flinched, a small, involuntary movement, and his lip curled in a sneer of triumph. He saw that he'd hit his mark. That's it, isn't it? He spat, his voice finally rising. You've been pouring poison in her ear, turning our own son's wife against me. After everything I've done for this family, after every penny I've earned, every drop of sweat. I work my fingers to the bone, even in retirement, managing our investments, making sure you have a roof over your head, and this is the thanks I get? Conspiring with your daughter-in-law behind my back. No, Robert, it's not like that, I pleaded, but my words were lost in the torrent of his rage. Not like that? Then what is it like? Why in God's name do you even need a card from her? Do I not provide for you? Do you offer anything? Anything at all? You need groceries, you tell me. You need a new dress, you tell me. I give you cash. Is my money not good enough for you? You have to go taking charity from our children. Charity. The word landed like a slap. It was meant to. He knew exactly how that word would make me feel. Diminished. Ashamed. A burden. And that's when he threw it. He didn't throw it at me. He's never done that. Robert's brand of cruelty is rarely so straightforward. He threw the card at the little side table next to my chair, the one where I keep my reading glasses and a small, porcelain bird my mother gave me. The card hit the bird, and the delicate, painted thing toppled over, falling to the hardwood floor with a sharp, shattering crack. The sound broke something inside me. It was just a little thing, a cheap piece of porcelain, but it was my mother's. It was one of the few things in this house that was solely mine, a link to a time before Robert, before this life. He didn't even look at the broken pieces. He just turned, his face a mask of fury and self-righteous indignation. I'm going out, he announced, as if he were the one who had been wronged. I need some air. I can't be in this house right now. And then he was gone. The slam of the door, the roar of his car starting, the squeal of the tires as he pulled out of the driveway too fast. And then, this silence. This heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I've been sitting here ever since, staring at the shattered fragments of the porcelain bird on the floor. I should get up. I should get a dustpan and brush and sweep them away. But I can't seem to move. My limbs feel as if they're filled with lead. It feels like if I sweep away those pieces, I'll be sweeping away the last tangible proof of what just happened, of the ugliness that lives in this beautiful, tidy house. If I clean it up, it will be as if it never happened. That is the rule in this house. We clean up the mess. We don't speak of the storm. We pretend the sun has always been shining. The card from Sarah. It was such a small thing, born of such kindness. It all started about 6 months ago. Michael and Sarah and our 2 grandchildren, Lily and Tom, were over for Sunday dinner. I'd made Robert's favorite, a pot roast with potatoes and carrots, the way his mother used to make it. After dinner, while Robert and Michael were watching a football game in the den, Sarah was helping me clear the dishes. Lily, who was 7 at the time, came running into the kitchen, her face bright with excitement. She'd been showing me a catalog for a toy she desperately wanted for her birthday. It was a dollhouse, a magnificent, 3-story thing with tiny furniture and a family of little doll people. Grandma, she'd said, tugging on my apron, can you buy it for me for my birthday? Please? You're the best present picker. I felt a familiar, hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I knelt down to her level, smoothed her hair, and said, oh, sweetheart, it's a beautiful house. Let's see what Grandpa and I can do. But I knew I couldn't just go and buy it. I would have to ask Robert for the money. And for a gift that expensive, he would question it. He'd say it was too extravagant. He'd ask if Sarah and Michael couldn't afford it themselves. He'd make me justify it, explain it, and in the end, the joy of giving the gift would be tainted by the humiliation of having to beg for the means to do so. Sarah saw it all. She saw the look on my face, the slight dimming of my smile. She's a perceptive woman, my daughter-in-law. Sometimes I think she sees right through the carefully constructed facade I've been maintaining for 4 decades. She sees the cracks in the paint. Later, after the children were buckled into their car seats and Michael was saying his goodbyes to Robert, Sarah pulled me aside in the hallway. "Pat," she said, her voice soft. She's the only one who calls me Pat. To Robert, I am Patricia. To my son, I am Mom. But to Sarah, I am Pat, a friend. I saw what happened with Lily. It's hard, isn't it? I just nodded, unable to speak, afraid the dam of my composure would break. I was thinking, she continued, reaching into her purse. I have this credit card for a secondary account I use for online shopping and things like that. It's just a small slush fund, really. I want you to have it. The password is Maple7 for your street. Just use it. For groceries if you're running low before Robert gives you the week's cash. For a coffee with a friend. For a birthday present for Lily. Don't even tell me what you buy. It's not a loan. It's just so you have a little bit of your own freedom. Every woman deserves that. She pressed the cool, smooth plastic into my hand. I looked at it, this little rectangle with her name, Sarah M. Carter, on the front. It felt like a key to a door I had forgotten even existed. Tears welled in my eyes. "Oh, Sarah, I couldn't," I whispered, trying to push it back into her hand. "Robert, he wouldn't understand." "He doesn't need to understand," she said, her grip firm but gentle. "And he doesn't need to know. This is between you and me. Please, Pat, let me do this for you." And so I took it. For the first few weeks, it sat in the back of my wallet, untouched. I was terrified of it. It felt like a betrayal, a secret kept from my husband of 42 years. But one afternoon, I was at the supermarket and realized I'd miscalculated. Robert had given me $150 for the week's groceries, but the price of beef had gone up again, and I was $10 short. The old panic started to rise in my throat. The embarrassment of having to put things back. The shame. The line of impatient people behind me. Then I remembered the card. With a trembling hand, I took it out and paid. The transaction went through. No alarms went off. The world didn't end. I walked out of that store feeling different, lighter. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I had solved a problem, a small one, yes, but I had solved it myself. Without asking, without explaining, without being made to feel like a child. Over the next few months, I used it sparingly. I bought that dollhouse for Lily, and the look of pure joy on her face when she unwrapped it was a balm to my soul. I bought a new set of gardening shears because my old ones were rusty and Robert had said they were good enough. I bought a beautiful hardback novel for myself instead of waiting for the paperback. Small rebellions. Tiny sips of independence. I knew Robert would not understand this. To him, our finances are a fortress, and he is the sole gatekeeper. It's not that he's a miser. He's not. He will spend lavishly on things he deems worthy. A new car for himself every 5 years. The latest golf clubs. A ridiculously expensive bottle of scotch to impress a neighbor. But my needs, my wants, have always been subject to his scrutiny, his approval. I remember once, about 20 years ago, I fell in love with a blue coat in a department store window. It was the color of a winter twilight with a soft faux fur collar. It wasn't wildly expensive, but it was more than I would have been given in my weekly housekeeping money. I mentioned it to him, casually, thinking he might suggest it as a birthday gift. He looked at me over the top of his newspaper. "A blue coat? What's wrong with the beige one you have?" "It's perfectly good." "I've had it for 10 years, Robert," I'd said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's just, I really love this one." "Love is a strong word for a coat, Patricia," he'd said, and the dismissal in his tone was absolute. "We don't buy things based on love. We buy them based on need. Your beige coat is perfectly functional. It keeps you warm. End of story." And it was. End of story. I wore that beige coat for another 5 years, and every time I put it on, I felt a little piece of myself wither. I felt plain, functional, and beige myself. He did that, you see. He didn't just control the money, he controlled the desire. He made you feel foolish for wanting something beautiful or unnecessary. He made your world small and practical and gray, like a ledger book. I never told Michael about any of this. What would be the point? It was the water we swam in. It was just the way Dad was. Michael grew up seeing it, and like all children, he accepted his reality as normal. He saw a father who provided, a mother who kept a lovely home. He didn't see the thousands of tiny paper cuts to my spirit. He didn't see the woman who had once dreamed of being a painter, who had loved the smell of turpentine and linseed oil, but who had put away her canvases because her art was deemed a messy hobby that took up too much space in the spare room. Robert needed that room for his office. His work, his needs, were always more real, more important. And now Sarah sees. She is from a different world, a different generation. She has her own career, her own money. She and Michael are partners in a way Robert and I have never been. They discuss purchases. They have their money and his money and her money. It's a foreign language to me. In my world, there was only ever his money. Even the home we live in, the home I have scrubbed and polished and filled with the scent of baking for 42 years, is in his name only. I realized that a few years ago when we were signing some refinancing papers. The lawyer slid the documents over, and it was just Robert's name on the deed. Robert Johnson, a married man, as his sole and separate property. When I'd questioned it later, in the car, he'd waved a dismissive hand. It was just easier that way, for tax purposes, when I bought it. It doesn't mean anything, Patricia. What's mine is yours. You know that. But it did mean something. It meant that in the eyes of the law, I was a resident, not an owner. A tenant in my own life. It meant that all my years of unpaid labor, the cooking, the cleaning, the child rearing, the social planning, the endless, invisible work of making a house a home, amounted to nothing on a piece of paper. It meant I had no legal claim to the very ground beneath my feet. The card from Sarah was a tiny counterpoint to that crushing reality. It was a document, however small, that said I had some agency. Someone trusted me with their money, no questions asked. And now, that small lifeline has caused this earthquake. The problem, I realize now, sitting here in the wreckage of the afternoon, is that I got careless. I started leaving the card in my main wallet, not hidden away. And I told him the password. I can't even remember why. I think he'd asked me to order something for him online, some specialty coffee beans, and his own card wasn't handy. Without thinking, caught up in the simple domestic task, I'd said, "Oh, just use Sarah's. The password is Maple7." It was a catastrophic mistake. A moment of forgetting the rules. By giving him the password, I had inadvertently given him access to my one, small, private thing. I had invited the jailer into the one corner of the prison yard where I'd found a patch of sun. And he, in his typical fashion, had assumed ownership of it. "It's all the same pot of money," he'd said. To him, my access to Sarah's kindness was just an extension of his own financial domain. And when that access was revoked, it wasn't an issue between Sarah and me. It was an affront to him. A challenge to his authority. The porcelain bird lies on the floor in 3 main pieces and a scattering of tiny, sharp shards. The head with its little black eyes staring up at the ceiling. The body is split in 2. It looks so final. So broken. I think of my mother, her hands gnarled with arthritis, handing it to me when I left home to marry Robert. "Every home needs a little bird," she'd said, "to remind you to sing, even when you don't feel like it." I haven't sung in a long time. My gaze drifts from the broken bird to the telephone sitting silently on its cradle across the room. I have to call Michael. Robert will have called him already, of that I am certain. He will have given his version of the story, a version in which he is the victim, the hard-working patriarch betrayed by his ungrateful wife and meddling daughter-in-law. He will paint me as a secretive, complaining woman, and Sarah as a disrespectful shrew who is trying to drive a wedge into his family. He is a master storyteller when it comes to his own narratives of grievance. I need to tell Michael my side, but the thought of it fills me with a profound weariness. It feels like asking him to take sides in a war that has been fought silently for decades. He loves his father. And he loves me. Putting him in the middle feels like a cruelty in itself. He has his own life, his own family, his own pressures. Why should I add my burdens to his? This is the trap. This is Robert's true genius. His control is so absolute that to even speak of it to the outside world feels like a betrayal. He has isolated me so perfectly that I have become my own warden. My silence is his greatest shield. For 42 years, I have protected him. I have protected my son from the truth of him. I have protected the image of our happy marriage. I have smiled at dinner parties, laughed at his jokes, and stood by his side, a perfect accessory to his perfect life. The price of peace has been my voice. But what about Sarah? She was mad, Robert said. I can picture it. Sarah is not a woman who backs down when she feels she is in the right. She has a strong sense of justice. She changed the password to protect her own financial boundaries, to protect the gift she gave me. She will not understand my silence. She will see it as weakness, as a capitulation. She will wonder why I am not standing with her, defending the kindness she extended to me. If I say nothing, I betray her. If I speak, I betray the unspoken pact of my marriage. I feel like I am standing on a cliff edge, with the ground crumbling away on all sides. Every choice is a fall. The grandfather clock begins to chime. 4 o'clock. The afternoon is bleeding into evening. Soon, the streetlights will flicker on. Robert might come home. Or he might not. Sometimes, after a fight like this, he stays out for hours, returning long after I have gone to bed. He will sleep in the spare room. And in the morning, he will act as though nothing has happened. He will expect coffee. He will expect the newspaper to be on the table. He will expect me to be the placid, smiling wife he left behind. And until now, I have always complied. It was easier. It was survival. But looking at the shattered bird on the floor, I feel a flicker of something new. It's not quite anger. It's more like a cold, hard clarity. The bird is broken. The silence is broken. The secret is out. Sarah changed the password. And in doing so, she has unwittingly handed me a choice. I can sweep up the pieces, pretend it never happened, and allow the heavy silence to settle over my life once more. Or I can leave the pieces on the floor. I can pick up the phone. I can, for the first time, refuse to be silent. My darling Michael, your mom changed the password. That's what Robert will have told him in that wounded, accusatory tone. Your mom, your wife, they're in it together against me. He will make it sound like a conspiracy. But the truth is so much simpler and so much more complicated. My daughter-in-law was mad. Yes, I'm sure she was. Mad that her husband's father felt entitled to her money, her account, her password. Mad on my behalf for the indignity she has seen me suffer. And I have been a ghost in my own life for so long. A quiet, accommodating spirit who haunts the hallways of a house that isn't hers, tending to the needs of a man who sees her as a function, not a person. The tremor in my hands has stopped. I look at them, at the wrinkled skin and the prominent veins. These are the hands that raised a son, that kneaded bread, that planted gardens, that polished this furniture until it gleamed. They're the hands of a life lived in service to others. They're strong hands. I push myself up from the armchair. The movement is stiff, my joints protesting. I walk over to the telephone, my reflection a wavering shape in the polished surface of the hall mirror. I look tired. The lines around my eyes seem deeper today. But my eyes themselves, they look different. There is a light in them that I haven't seen in a very long time. It's the pilot light of a long-extinguished fire, flickering, threatening to catch. I pick up the receiver. It feels heavy in my hand, like the weight of all the words I've never said. I dial Michael's number from memory. My fingers are steady now. The phone rings. Once. Twice. I picture him in his own home, a place of partnership and laughter. I picture Sarah there, her spine straight, her gaze clear. He will answer. And I will have to speak. I will have to find the words. The truth. My truth. After 42 years of silence, I am terrified my voice will come out as nothing more than a croak, a rusty hinge that hasn't been opened in decades. But I have to try. The bird is broken. There is nothing left to do but learn to sing. Hello. Michael's voice. My son. My darling boy. I take a breath. The air feels different. It feels like my own. Michael, I say. And my voice, though quiet, is clear. It's Mom. We need to talk. Michael, I said, and the sound of my own voice, quiet but clear, was a foreign country I was visiting for the first time. It's Mom. We need to talk. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a brief pocket of static and silence. I could picture him perfectly. He'd be in his home office, a room so different from his father's, cluttered with his architectural drawings, blueprints held down by coffee mugs, photos of the kids taped to the monitor. He would have pushed his glasses up on his forehead and leaned back in his chair, a frown of concern pinching the space between his eyebrows. Michael has always been a worrier, a peacemaker. From the time he was a little boy, he hated conflict. He would be the one to give his favorite toy to a crying friend, just to make the crying stop. Mom? What's wrong? You sound strange. Did something happen? His voice was laced with an anxious tenderness that almost broke me. It's the voice he uses when one of the children is sick, a blend of gentle inquiry and a readiness to solve the problem. I took another breath, steadying myself against the wave of emotion his simple kindness unleashed. Your father, he got angry this afternoon. There was an incident. I couldn't bring myself to call it a fight. A fight implies two participants. This was a storm, and I was just the landscape it had torn through. About the credit card, he asked, and there was a weariness in his voice now, a note of resignation. He called me a little while ago. He was, well, you know how he gets. He was pretty worked up. Said he was embarrassed at the hardware store. Of course Robert had called him first. He had to be the first one to frame the narrative, to plant his flag of victimhood. I'm sure he was, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. He was very upset that Sarah had changed the password. Yeah, well, Sarah's pretty mad, too, Michael admitted, and I heard a muffled sound, like he was covering the receiver to say something to her. I imagined her standing in the doorway of his office, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of anger and concern for me. She feels Dad had no right to be using the card in the first place, Mom. She gave it to you. For you. She said it was a massive overstep of boundaries. Boundaries. That was Sarah's word. It was a modern word, a psychologist's word. In my day, we didn't have boundaries. We had duties. We had roles. A wife's role was to be the soft place for her husband to land, no matter how hard he fell. To absorb his moods, to manage his temper, to present a smooth, unruffled surface to the world. A boundary was a fence, and my life had been an open field for Robert to trample through as he pleased. She's right, I said, and the admission felt huge, a boulder rolling away from the mouth of a cave. She is right. But Robert doesn't see it that way. To him, anything that's yours is his. He said it was like I was taking charity. And conspiring with Sarah against him. Mom, that's ridiculous, Michael said quickly, his peacemaker instincts kicking in. He was just angry. He doesn't mean that stuff. You know how he just says things when he's in a temper. And there it was. The excuse I had made for Robert, and taught my son to make for him for 40 years. You know how he is. He doesn't mean it. But he did mean it. The things he said in anger weren't random flares. They were the molten core of his belief system, bursting through the polite crust of his public persona. The anger didn't make him say things he didn't mean. It gave him permission to say what he truly felt. Does he, Michael? I asked, and my voice was barely a whisper. After a while, the things you say are the things you are. I looked down at the floor at the shattered porcelain bird. He broke Mother's bird. The silence on the line was different this time. It wasn't just a pause. It was a heavy, listening silence. The broken bird was not an abstract concept like boundaries or conspiring. It was a physical object. A thing Michael had seen on that side table his entire life. He had touched it as a boy, running his small fingers over its smooth, painted wings. It was a piece of our shared history. A fact. He broke it. Michael's voice was sharper now. How? Did he throw it? He threw the credit card, I clarified, needing to be precise. The truth was important. He threw the card at the table, and it hit the bird, and it fell. He didn't even look at it. He just left. I could hear him breathing, a long, slow exhale. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know how much you love that thing. It's not about the thing, Michael, I said, and suddenly I felt a desperate need to make him understand, to see the shape of the life I had been living. It's never about the thing. It's not about the bird or the money or the password. It's about the carelessness, the rage, the fact that my feelings, my things, my mother's memory, they don't matter when he is angry. They are just obstacles in his path. Collateral damage. I was crying now, silent tears tracking down my cheeks, dripping from my chin onto the front of my blouse. I had held it together for so long, and now the dam was cracking. Mom, don't cry, he said, his voice thick with distress. Okay, don't cry. Let me talk to Sarah. Let us figure something out. Are you going to be okay tonight? Is he coming back? I don't know, I said, wiping my face with the back of my hand. Sometimes he does. Sometimes he doesn't. It doesn't matter. And I realized, as I said it, that it was true. His presence and his absence were just two different kinds of emptiness. You don't have to figure anything out, Michael. I needed to tell you. I needed someone to know that the bird is broken. Okay, Mom, he said softly. I know. I hear you. I'll call you back soon. I hung up the phone and stood there for a long time, my hand still resting on the receiver. The house was utterly still. The conversation had drained me, left me feeling hollowed out and strangely calm. I had done it. I had spoken a small piece of the truth. I hadn't screamed or accused or demanded anything. I had simply reported the facts. A card was declined. A man got angry. A bird was broken. I walked back into the living room and looked at the fragments on the floor. My first instinct, a reflex honed by decades of habit, was to find the dustpan. Clean it up. Erase the evidence. Restore the order. That was my job. I was the family's curator of normalcy. No matter what storms raged, it was my duty to tidy up the debris so that the next day could begin on a clean slate, as if nothing had happened. It was a form of complicity, I realized. My constant cleaning, my smoothing over of every crisis, had enabled Robert's behavior. He could afford to make a mess because he knew I would always be there to clean it up. He could afford to break things because I would be the one to sweep away the pieces. Not this time. I turned away from the mess and went into the kitchen. I wasn't hungry, but the mechanics of preparing a meal were a comfort. I opened the refrigerator. It was filled with the groceries I had bought with Sarah's card just 2 days before. Fresh asparagus, a carton of organic eggs, a small container of expensive Greek yogurt that Robert would call rabbit food. Small luxuries I had allowed myself. Looking at them now, they felt like evidence in a trial. I decided I wouldn't cook. I wouldn't make the shepherd's pie I had planned. I would not perform the comforting ritual of a hot meal waiting for him. I took out a plate and put 2 slices of bread on it. I added a slice of cheese from the back of the deli drawer. It was a lonely, pathetic-looking meal. A meal for one. A meal that said, I've given up for the day. I was halfway through my sad sandwich when I heard his car pull into the driveway. He wasn't gone for long then. That was a bad sign. A short absence meant the anger hadn't burned itself out. It had just banked down, waiting for more fuel. I sat at the kitchen table, my back to the door, and continued to chew the dry bread, my jaw tight. The back door opened and closed. I heard his footsteps, heavy on the linoleum. He came to stand beside the table, and I could feel his presence, his shadow falling over me. I didn't look up. Patricia. His voice was completely normal, cheerful even. As if he had just come home from a pleasant drive. It was the most bewildering, most maddening thing he did. The complete and utter denial. The erasure of the immediate past. I was thinking, he went on, moving to the refrigerator and opening it, we could go out for dinner. To that Italian place you like. My treat. We haven't done that in a while. I swallowed the wad of bread and cheese in my mouth. It felt like gravel. I still didn't look at him. I'm not hungry, I said. He closed the refrigerator door. Not hungry? You've barely got anything on that plate. Come on. It'll be nice. Get dressed up a little. He was bustling now, the benevolent husband, planning a lovely evening. It was a performance, and he expected me to be his co-star. I don't want to go out, Robert, I said, my voice low and even. He stopped his bustling. He stood still. "What's the matter with you?" he asked, the cheerfulness evaporating, replaced by a cold edge of irritation. "I'm trying to be nice here. I'm trying to take my wife out for a nice meal, and you're sitting there sulking like a child." Sulking. That's what he called my reaction to his rage. A childish pout. It wasn't righteous anger or hurt or fear. It was a sulk. It diminished my feelings, turning them into a petty, immature display. I finally turned my head and looked at him. "You screamed at me," I said. "You threw things. You broke my mother's porcelain bird. And you walked out. Now you're back, and you're pretending none of that happened. You want to go for pasta." He stared at me, his face hardening. He glanced into the living room, his eyes flicking to the side table, to the floor. "Oh, that," he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. "It was an accident. It fell. These things happen. I'll buy you another one." "You can't buy me another one," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It was from my mother. It was 70 years old. You can't replace it." "For God's sake, Patricia, it was a piece of cheap crockery," he snapped, his voice rising again. "Are you going to hold a grudge over a 10-cent knickknack for the rest of your life?" I said I was sorry it broke. "What more do you want?" But he hadn't said he was sorry. He had said, "I'll buy you another one." He hadn't apologized for his anger, for his cruelty, for the terror he'd inspired. He was apologizing for the accidental breaking of an object he considered worthless. It was a transaction, not an apology. "I want you to acknowledge what you did," I said, standing up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. "We were face to face now. You were cruel. Your words were meant to hurt me, and they did. And you act as if you have some kind of amnesia. As if the last 3 hours just didn't happen." "What I did," he spluttered, his face turning a blotchy red. "What about what you did? Hiding credit cards from me. Scheming with your daughter-in-law. Making me look like a fool at the hardware store. I have every right to be angry. Any man would be." "It was her card to give, and mine to have," I said, and the words felt like they were coming from someone else, someone braver than I had ever been. "It had nothing to do with you." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. It was as if I had suddenly started speaking in a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. The idea that anything in my life could have nothing to do with him was a concept so alien to his view of the world that he was momentarily stunned. Then the fury returned tenfold. "In my house," he hissed, jabbing a finger toward the floor, "under my roof, everything has to do with me. Especially when it comes to money. You have forgotten your place, Patricia. You have been listening to that woman, to Sarah, with all her modern, feminist nonsense. She is poisoning you." He turned on his heel and strode out of the kitchen. "I'm going to my office," he announced. "And I don't want to be disturbed." A moment later, I heard the door to the spare room, his office, shut with a definitive click. I stood in the silent kitchen, my body shaking. The confrontation had been short, brutal, and utterly pointless. He was incapable of seeing it from any perspective but his own. He was the wronged party. I was the ungrateful, secretive, sulking wife. Sarah was the malevolent outside influence. The story was written, the cast was set, and he would never, ever deviate from the script. Later that night, I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling. The familiar weight of him beside me was gone, and the space felt both liberating and terrifyingly vast. I heard him moving around in his office for a while, the faint sound of drawers opening and closing, then silence. He would be sleeping in the guest bed in there tonight. It was part of the ritual. The silent punishment. I couldn't sleep. My mind was a carousel of images and memories, spinning faster and faster. I thought of my painting. It felt like a lifetime ago. When Michael was young, I had taken a community art class. I fell in love with it. The smell of the oil paints, the rough texture of the canvas, the magic of creating a world out of color and light. I was good at it. My teacher said I had a natural eye for composition. For a year or two, it was my salvation. I'd set up my easel in the spare room, and for a few hours a week, I would lose myself. I painted landscapes mostly. The creek behind our old house, the way the sun hit the sycamore trees in the autumn. Robert had never approved. He never forbade it, not in so many words. That wasn't his style. He killed things slowly. Are you still fiddling with your paints? He'd ask, his tone making it sound like a childish hobby. The smell of that turpentine gives me a headache. Or, those canvases aren't cheap, are they? Seems like an expensive way to make a mess. He would come in and look at a nearly finished piece, his head cocked. The blue on that sky is a bit loud, don't you think? He chipped away at my confidence, at my joy, until the act of picking up a brush felt like an act of defiance, and I no longer had the strength for it. The last painting I ever did was of a little blue boat on a lake. I was proud of it. The water looked real. You could almost feel the cool breeze. I left it on the easel to dry. The next day, I came in to find a dark smudge across the water. Robert had been in there, looking for some papers, and had brushed against it with his briefcase. It's ruined, I'd said, my voice flat with despair. Oh, for heaven's sake, it's just a painting, he'd replied, not even looking. You can just paint over it. But I couldn't. He had smudged it, erased a piece of it with his carelessness, and it felt like a metaphor for our entire life. I packed away the paints, the brushes, the canvases. I put them in a box in the attic, and I never took them out again. The spare room became his office. My world of color was replaced by his world of gray filing cabinets and neat stacks of paper. I must have drifted off, because I was startled awake by the ringing of the phone on my nightstand. The illuminated clock read 10:17 p.m. My heart leaped into my throat. A phone call this late could only mean bad news. I snatched it up. Hello? Mom? It's me. Did I wake you? It was Michael. No, I was awake, I said, sitting up, my heart still hammering. Listen, he said, and his voice was different. The tentative, peacemaking tone was gone. It was firm, resolute. I've been talking with Sarah. For a long time. She helped me see some things. About Dad. About the way things have been for a long time. The broken bird, that was the tip of the iceberg, wasn't it, Mom? I was silent. I didn't know what to say. You don't have to answer that, he said gently. But we're worried. I'm worried. This isn't just about a credit card. It's not just about Dad having a temper. Sarah calls it financial control. Emotional abuse. He said the words carefully, as if they were sharp-edged and he was afraid they would cut me. But hearing them spoken aloud, by my son, didn't cut me. They validated me. They gave a name to the nameless, heavy thing that had been sitting on my chest for years. We can't just let this go, he continued. We can't just pretend it didn't happen, which I know is what Dad is going to want to do. It's what we've always done. So, Sarah and I, we've made a decision. We're driving down on Saturday morning. We're bringing the kids. We'll tell Dad it's just a surprise weekend visit. But we're coming to see you. We need to talk, all of us. Properly. Face to face. A fresh wave of terror washed over me, colder and more powerful than the first. A phone call was one thing. A confrontation in my own living room was another. Robert, Michael, Sarah, all in the same room. It would be a battle. The thought of it made me want to curl into a ball and disappear. Oh, Michael, I don't know, I stammered. That will just make him furious. Maybe it's time he got furious in front of someone else for a change, Michael said, and the steel in his voice surprised me. This was not my peacemaking boy. This was a man. A husband. A son who had finally opened his eyes. We're not going to let him bully you, Mom. We're not going to let him scream at you. We'll be there. Sarah and I. We're coming. We'll be there Saturday around noon. He wasn't asking. He was telling me. The decision had been made. The cavalry was coming. Whether I wanted them to or not. Okay, I whispered, because it was the only word I could find. Get some sleep, Mom, he said, his voice softening again. We'll see you in a couple of days. We love you. I love you, too, I said, and hung up the phone. I lay back against the pillows, my mind reeling. Saturday. That was 2 days away. In 2 days, the carefully constructed illusion of my life was going to be shattered, just like the porcelain bird. The war that had been fought in whispers and silences was about to become a shouting match in my living room. I was terrified. But beneath the terror, somewhere deep inside, that tiny pilot light of a long-extinguished fire flickered again. It wasn't a choice I had made. It was a choice that had been made for me by Sarah's anger and Michael's love. The storm was coming. All I could do now was decide if I was going to hide from it, or if I was finally going to stand up and face the wind. The silence in the house had changed. After I hung up the phone with Michael, the old silence, the one that was heavy with unspoken resentments and my own fear, had lifted. It was replaced by something new. A silence that was thin, taut, and humming with a terrifying potential energy. It was the silence of the air just before a lightning strike. The silence of a held breath. The 2 days that stretched between that phone call and Saturday at noon felt like an eternity, a vast, empty landscape I had to cross alone, knowing there was a cliff at the other end. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the center of the bed, a no man's land I hadn't occupied in 40 years, and stared into the darkness. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window sounded amplified, ominous. I thought of Michael's words. Financial control. Emotional abuse. They were clinical words, modern words, but they landed on me with the force of revelation. They were the correct labels for the unlabeled specimens of misery I had been collecting my entire adult life. For so long, I had called it by other names. He's just difficult. He has a temper. He's a traditional man. It's just the way he is. These were the soft, blurry euphemisms I had used to make the sharp edges of my life bearable. But Michael and Sarah, with their clear-eyed, modern perspective, had handed me the proper, scientific names. And in naming the sickness, they had acknowledged it was real. It wasn't just in my head. I wasn't just being overly sensitive. The next morning, Friday, I was up before the sun. I went downstairs and made a pot of coffee, drank a cup while standing at the kitchen window, watching the sky lighten from charcoal to a bruised purple, then to a pale, hopeful gray. The ritual of it, the familiar smell, the warmth of the mug in my hands, was a small anchor in the churning sea of my anxiety. I heard the spare room door open just before 7. Robert's routine was as fixed as the orbit of the moon. He would use the guest bathroom, then come down for coffee. He walked into the kitchen without looking at me. His face was set in a mask of stern, righteous indignation. He was the wronged husband, forced to sleep in the guest room by his unreasonable wife. He went to the coffee pot, saw that it was nearly empty, and made a sound of disgust in the back of his throat. He poured the last of the lukewarm coffee into his mug and slammed it into the microwave, the noise unnecessarily loud in the quiet room. He took it out after a minute, went to the sugar bowl, and managed to spill a cascade of white crystals across the clean countertop. He didn't wipe it up. It was a small, petty act of aggression. A message. You have upset the order of things, and now I will create disorder for you to clean. I said nothing. I simply took a damp cloth and wiped away the sugar. My silence seemed to infuriate him more than any argument would have. He drank his coffee in 3 large, noisy gulps, then rinsed his mug and left it on the counter instead of putting it in the dishwasher 2 feet away. Another small message. Another mess for me to manage. I'm going to the club, he announced to the empty space in front of him. I'll be back late this afternoon. He was going to play golf. He was going to spend the day with his friends, other men like him, where he would likely complain about the stock market and the government and, perhaps, in vague, coded terms, about the trials of having a difficult wife. He would perform his role as a successful, contented retiree, a man in charge of his world. He would spend the day reinforcing the version of himself that he presented to the public, a version that bore no resemblance to the angry, cruel man who had shattered my mother's bird. After he left, the new, humming silence returned. The house felt enormous, a stage set for a play that hadn't started yet. I wandered from room to room, touching things, the polished wood of the dining table, the soft fabric of the curtains. It was a beautiful house. Robert was right about that. He had provided. From the outside, we were the picture of success. A comfortable home in a nice neighborhood. A long, stable marriage. A successful son. But a house is just a container. And ours was a beautiful, polished box holding 4 decades of decay. I knew I couldn't just leave the broken pieces of the bird on the floor until Saturday. It felt like a trap, something Robert could point to as evidence of my sulking or my melodrama. But I couldn't bring myself to sweep them into the dustpan, to relegate them to the trash with the coffee grounds and the potato peels. So I found the box that my last good pair of winter gloves had come in, a sturdy, flat box with a lid. I knelt on the hardwood floor, my knees protesting, and I began to collect the pieces. It was a delicate, painstaking task. The 3 large pieces of the body and the head. Then, the dozens of tiny, razor-sharp slivers that had scattered across the floorboards. I picked them up one by one, my fingers clumsy. It felt like I was gathering the fragments of my own life. This piece was the cancelled art class. This piece was the blue coat I never had. This piece was every time he had called me foolish or sentimental. This piece was the discovery that my name wasn't on the deed to my own home. I placed them all carefully inside the box, nestled them in a piece of tissue paper, and put the lid on. I didn't hide the box. I walked over to the fireplace and set it squarely in the middle of the mantelpiece. It was a plain, brown cardboard box, incongruous among the framed photos and brass candlesticks. It was a statement. It was a placeholder for a conversation that had not yet happened. It said, "This is not forgotten." The rest of the day, I moved through a fog of anxiety. I tried to read, but I couldn't focus on the words. I tried to watch television, but the cheerful noise of the game shows felt like an insult. My mind kept returning to one insistent question, a question I had pushed away for years. Why had I stayed? Why had I accepted this life for so long? It wasn't a simple answer. It was 1,000 answers, 1,000 threads that had woven together to create the tapestry of my captivity. In the beginning, there was love. I had to remember that. Robert hadn't always been this way. Or perhaps the anger was always there, but it was hidden beneath a layer of charm and ambition that I had mistaken for strength. He was handsome, confident, and he pursued me with a single-minded determination that I found flattering. I was young, just 22, and I thought his desire to provide for me, to make all the decisions, was a form of love. It felt safe. It felt like he was building a fortress to protect me from the world. It took me years to realize I was being protected from my own life, locked inside the very fortress he had built. Then, there was Michael. From the moment he was born, my world recentered itself around him. He was my sun, my moon, my stars. My primary purpose became to create a stable, happy home for him. And a stable, happy home, in the world I grew up in, meant having a father in the house. It meant absorbing Robert's moods so they didn't spill over onto our son. It meant presenting a united front, a picture of domestic harmony, even when the silence in our bedroom screamed with unspoken anger. I would have done anything to protect Michael's childhood, and I did. I sacrificed my own happiness on the altar of his. I didn't realize at the time that children are more perceptive than we think. He may not have seen the battles, but he must have felt the tension. He must have breathed the air of my quiet desperation. He had learned to be a peacemaker because he grew up in a silent war zone. And then, there was the money. The simple, brutal fact of my own dependence. I had quit my secretarial job when Michael was born at Robert's insistence. A child needs his mother at home, he declared, and I, a product of my time, had agreed. I had never gone back to work. My skills had withered. My confidence had evaporated. All the money was his. I had nothing of my own, no secret account, no nest egg. The thought of leaving, of walking out the door with nothing but my handbag, was not just emotionally terrifying, it was practically impossible. Where would I go? How would I live? He had woven the web of my dependency so skillfully over the decades that the idea of escape was a fantasy, as unrealistic as flying. Sarah's credit card had been the first time in 40 years I'd had access to money that wasn't filtered through his hands. It was a taste of a freedom I had forgotten existed, and it had been intoxicating. In the late afternoon, looking for something to distract me, I found myself pulling out the old photo albums from the bottom of the bookshelf. I sat in my armchair and opened the first one, its plastic pages crinkling with age. The first photo was of our wedding day. There we were, Robert and I, standing on the steps of the church. He looked so proud, so handsome in his dark suit. I was in a simple white dress my mother had helped me sew, holding a bouquet of daisies. I was smiling, but looking at it now, I could see the uncertainty in my eyes. I was a girl on the edge of a precipice, smiling into the abyss, mistaking it for a future. I turned the page. Michael as a baby, swaddled in a blue blanket. Michael on his first tricycle. Michael on his first day of school, his backpack almost as big as he was. In every one of these photos, I was there, my arm around him, my face a mask of maternal adoration. And it was real, that adoration. But looking at myself now, this younger Patricia, I felt a wave of pity for her. She had no idea what was coming. She thought her deep love for her child would be enough to sustain her. She didn't know that it would also be her cage. I came to a section of a family vacation to the beach when Michael was about 10. There was a photo of the three of us building a sandcastle. We were all laughing. The sun was shining. The ocean was a perfect blue in the background. It looked like the ideal family moment. But as I stared at it, another memory surfaced, sharp and clear. I remembered that day. I remembered Robert getting furious because I had forgotten to pack the specific brand of soda he liked. I remembered him berating me in the hotel room, his voice a low, vicious growl, while Michael pretended to be engrossed in a comic book. I remembered going down to the beach later, my eyes red and swollen, and forcing a smile for the camera, for the sake of the photo, for the sake of the memory we were supposed to be creating. The entire vacation was like that, a series of beautiful moments captured on film, punctuated by his simmering anger and my desperate attempts to placate him. We weren't a happy family on vacation. We were a woman and a boy trying to manage the moods of a volatile man in a new location. The photo wasn't a memory. It was a lie. I closed the album. The carefully curated story of our happy life felt like a fraud. All those years, I hadn't just been a wife and a mother. I had been a public relations manager, a crisis negotiator, an actress in a long-running play. I needed air. I put on my walking shoes and slipped out the back door, something I rarely did without announcing my destination. I walked through our quiet neighborhood, past the manicured lawns and the perfect houses. I wondered what went on behind those other closed doors. Did Mrs. Henderson next door ever feel a tremor of fear when she heard her husband's car in the driveway? Did the smiling woman across the street ever cry in her kitchen over a careless, cruel word? Or was it just me? Was I the only one living this lie? My walk took me to the edge of the neighborhood, near a small patch of woods I hadn't explored in years. I went in, following a faint path. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was quiet here, but it was a good quiet. A natural, peaceful silence. I came to a small clearing and sat on a fallen log. I thought about the girl I was before Robert, the girl who loved poetry and art. The girl who had dreams that were entirely her own. Where did she go? The thought propelled me. When I got back to the house, Robert was still out. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the folding ladder to the attic. I hadn't been up there in at least a decade. It was Robert's domain, a place for storage boxes and old financial records. I climbed the rickety steps into the hot, stuffy darkness. I pulled the string for the single bare bulb, and the space was illuminated in a weak yellow light. It was a graveyard of our life. Old baby furniture, boxes of clothes, Michael's high school yearbooks. In the far corner, covered in a thick layer of dust, was a stack of boxes I hadn't seen in years. One was labeled Patricia before. My heart gave a little jump. I dragged the box into the center of the floor and opened it. Inside was a time capsule of a person I barely remembered. My old high school diploma. A faded corsage from a dance. A diary whose lock was broken. And at the bottom, a slim volume of poetry, A Few Figs from Thistles by Edna St. Vincent Millay. It had been a gift from my mother for my 18th birthday. Inside the cover, her familiar, looping handwriting, for my Patricia. Never let anyone extinguish your fire. Love, Mom. I sat on the dusty floor of the attic and began to read. The words were a jolt to my system, a shock of recognition. They were passionate, defiant, full of a fierce love for life. I came to the most famous one, the one I had memorized as a girl. My candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But ah, my foes, and oh, my friends. It gives a lovely light. Tears streamed down my face. My candle hadn't burned at both ends. It had barely been allowed to be lit. Robert had kept it trimmed, shielded from the wind, giving off just enough light to be functional, to illuminate his world, but never enough to blaze. My mother's warning, her wish for me, had gone unheeded. I had let my fire be extinguished until all that was left was a faint, warm ember of memory. I brought the book downstairs with me. I wiped the dust from its cover and placed it on my nightstand. It was another piece of evidence, another part of the story. The next morning, Saturday, the day of the arrival, the air in the house was electric. Robert seemed to have decided that the Cold War was over. He came downstairs in a better mood, whistling off-key. He must have assumed my 2 days of quiet were a sign of my capitulation. He probably thought I had come to my senses and realized my folly. "Morning," he said, actually looking at me this time. "Smells like coffee." Good. He was magnanimous in his victory. I just nodded, my stomach a knot of dread. I moved through the morning in a daze, cleaning things that were already clean, wiping counters, straightening cushions. It was a nervous, frantic energy, the way you prepare a house for a storm, battening down the hatches. Robert was oblivious. He read the paper, did the crossword puzzle, and talked about getting the lawnmower serviced. He had no idea that a car was at that very moment driving down the highway, carrying a reckoning. At 11:30, he was in the backyard, pulling a few weeds from the rose bushes he was so proud of. I watched him from the kitchen window. He looked like any other retired husband, pottering in his garden on a Saturday morning. A pillar of the community. A good man. The disconnect between the public man and the private one was so vast, it gave me a kind of vertigo. At 11:55, I heard it. The sound I had been dreading and, in a strange way, hoping for. The crunch of tires on the gravel of our driveway. I saw Michael's blue minivan pull up behind Robert's sedan. Robert heard it too. He stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers, a look of mild surprise on his face. "Well, look at that," he called through the open kitchen window. "Looks like we have company." The car doors opened. I heard Lily's high-pitched shriek of "Grandma," "Grandpa," followed by Tom's deeper, 8-year-old voice. They came running towards the house, a whirlwind of youthful energy. Then Michael and Sarah got out. They stood by the car for a moment. Michael looked nervous, his shoulders tight. Sarah stood beside him, her posture straight, her expression unreadable but firm. She looked at the house, her eyes finding the kitchen window, finding me. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of solidarity. A nod that said, "We are here. You are not alone." Robert walked towards them, a broad, welcoming smile on his face, ready to play the part of the happy, surprised patriarch. Well, what's all this? Didn't know you were coming down." The children ran past him and burst through the back door into the kitchen, hugging my legs. I hugged them back, burying my face in their hair, breathing in their sweet, innocent scent. Over their heads, I could see the scene unfolding in the driveway. Michael, trying to look casual. Robert, clapping him on the back. And Sarah, standing silently, her arms crossed, watching, waiting. The actors were all in place. The audience was seated. The play was about to begin. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I heard their footsteps on the porch. I heard the front door open. Then, the doorbell rang. It was an absurdly formal sound, given they were already in the house. It must have been Lily, pressing it for fun. But the chime echoed through the silent house like a summons. A bell tolling the end of one life and the beginning of whatever was to come next.